Welcome to Rockstar Doctor Life. I'm Alyssa Longo, and each episode, my guests and I will bring you fresh, fun ways to rock your life as a health professional and create a business that aligns with who you are and the life you want to live. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Rockstar Doctor Life. Today's episode is going to be something special because in addition to having amazing conversations with people rocking it in their business life, our guest today is certainly doing that, but she's bringing to us some other information that can help you live your best Rockstar Doctor life. A conversation that we've been having quite a bit lately. I've been having with my coaching clients, and something I've been observing probably for at least the last year has been overwhelm, a little bit of burnout, people wanting to avoid burnout, physical, emotional exhaustion, or just having to shift. We've all dealt with a lot of changes over the last couple of years. And for some people, it's been a little easier than others to navigate that. And, navigating children, aging parents, the things that we all deal with constantly, in our lives. So today's guest is going to help us walk through some tips about how we can best optimize that. Before we dive into the conversation though, a couple of quick announcements. If you haven't heard, I'm fortunate to have Jane sponsor the show. If you have not checked out Jane, they are an amazing platform. I use them exclusively in my clinical practice. I love the ease. I love the simplicity. I love that people in my practice can book appointments and connect with me while I'm on the beach or on the trails or with my loved ones. So if you want to check out Jane, be sure to use the promo code RockstarDoc and you will get your first month free. And you can book a call with them and find out all the amazing features that they have to offer. My second announcement, friends, is that September is a big month. September, I have the next live event happening here in Collingwood, the beautiful town that I live in. September 10th, a one-day training event. Love to see you with me. September is also a big month because the next Focus Formula 12-week group coaching program with me will also be launching. So I'm going to post in the show notes all the details about those two events. And if you have more questions, just feel free to reach out. Okay, Sarah, welcome to the show. Sarah Covey is a registered psychotherapist that actually practices only about half an hour away from me. I was fortunate enough to come across Sarah in a heartfelt Instagram video that she did. I think it was maybe about a year ago now, Sarah.
No, it was January.
Okay, so 6 months ago, and it was regarding the things that you were observing in your clinical practice we live in Ontario, Canada. So, navigating lockdowns and some of the, challenges that our communities have been facing in light of all of that. And you had a really passionate, heartfelt message about what you were observing. And I instantly connected with it. And I was even more excited when I realized you were so close to me. So here we are now having a conversation. I'm thrilled to finally see you in person, at least, face to face on the camera here. So tell us a little bit about who you are, what you're doing, and then we'll dive into all the tips you have for us.
Well, professionally, I go by Sarah Joy Covey just so people can find me, but people always ask me if they call me Sarah Joy, and I said, no, they just call me. I just go by Sarah, but there's other Sarah Covey. So if you're looking for me online, that's where to find me. I am the clinical director of Covey Wellness Center, which is a holistic, primarily psychotherapy-based center, although we have a number of other professionals that are working with us, a kinesiologist, a yoga coach, a fitness trainer, a nutritionist, hoping to get an RMT. So if there's any RMTs out there that resonate with what we're talking about here, please get in touch with us. We'd like to expand that so we have a really holistic practice. And then we also have a really amazing wellness bookshop and retail store available as part of our center. So we're really trying to give people lots of points of entry here. And so I'm the owner, the clinical director of that, and a mom of 4 kiddos. 19 is the oldest, down through to 12, and a longtime resident of my little community of Elmville, which is why I've placed my center here, because even though we serve people across Canada with our therapy provision, we do want to be present in my community. And I feel really passionately about supporting communities north of Toronto, specifically north of Barrie, because we're really underserviced in our areas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how did you, so you've been a longtime resident community member of Elmville. How long have you been in practice?
I have been in practice for 7 years as a RP. I was a high school teacher in the community at the high school for 15 years prior to that. So there was a major sort of what I call midlife opportunity as opposed to midlife crisis. And I took it, and to make a long story short, maybe for another time, sort of that restlessness of moving out of a career that had a lot of perks and what I like to call the golden handcuffs into sort of a free fall into working for myself and building something that was really authentic and congruent for me. That's kind of how I came into this. So this is second career for me, with teaching being a first career. So
I love it. I mean, that takes a lot of courage to, as you just said, face your fears. And, you had something really secure, something stable, work that I'm guessing that you loved. You 15
I did.
Years.
Yeah.
And, did you move into psychotherapy because you saw it was like a passion project, or did you really just see a need in the people you were working with in the school?
Probably a bit of both. Like when I look back now, it's kind of surprising to me that I didn't become a therapist sooner, just based on what I would read just for fun. I read all kinds of things about relationships, for example, and I just was so curious about that and passionate about that. And even though I was an English teacher, primarily did some leadership and student success. So I do love reading in general. I love poetry and literature and all of that, but all of my nonfiction reading was not around education. It was around relationships and health and wellness and spirituality. And I just voraciously devoured all that stuff. So I feel like I was like a lifelong learner of psychotherapy practice all the time I was a teacher. I did a lot of speaking to women's groups and ran some different groups and things like that concurrently with that. So I think it was a passion all the way through. And then for me, it just was a point where I felt like, as much as I loved my work as a teacher, which I absolutely did, I always tell people I basically cried through my entire last month of teaching every time a student said, how much I'd meant to them, or a teacher said, we're going to miss you or something. I would just be, because I was grieving like this thing that really mattered to me. But then I just realized I was really stifled by the system. So I felt like I was really stuck. The image I use is that cocoon idea of like I was trying to break free and spread my wings, but I couldn't find the pathways. I tried a few pathways, taking over a department within the school, and which was good. It solidified some passions for me because it was the student success department, which works with at-risk youth. So that made me realize how much I really enjoyed counseling and supporting people who are in crisis and who are needing to build healthier lifestyles and that sort of thing. So in some ways that move made me realize I had to move out, but I just couldn't find the pathway. It didn't appeal to me to do admin or move into the board. The system just didn't fit me anymore. So I feel like I'd outgrown it in some ways. So I still have a really strong passion to teach, but just not in that particular capacity that the school board was offering. Yeah.
Said a word that I don't like because it gives me all the same feelings that I think it gave you, and that's stuck. Yeah. If I feel trapped, stuck in any way, I do not thrive. I need momentum. I need movement. Freedom is one of my core values, which is why the last couple of years have been challenging being Canadian. However, 100%, stuck in relationships, in business, being a creative soul, you need to keep doing things. And it's not always easy to, first of all, recognize when you're stuck. And more importantly, it's not always easy to make a leap and make a change. Yeah. And I would love us to start our conversation, here about how do you navigate that, or what is your suggestions that you have for your clients to one, how do you recognize what you're just stuck, unfulfilled, apathetic, indifferent, all those words? I just want to you can't, if you're watching this, I just want to shake it all off because I don't like that feeling.
Don't make me stay there. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because that's one of the common questions actually that I ask clients is, where do you feel stuck? Because it's a good way to take stock of where you are in your life. And if you feel like you're not getting that forward momentum, whether it's in your physical fitness, whether it's in your relationships, whether it's in your workplace, it's a good sort of red flag to go up. I do feel that I'm pushing out against my cocoon, but I can't spread my wings. Right. So it is a good indicator. I think it's a starting place for thinking about what really matters to you, because you wouldn't feel stuck if there was an emotion you wanted to move through. Right. So for me, that coming up against that barrier was a problem because I didn't I didn't want a barrier to be there, if that makes sense. Like we might have rhythms, for example, where we don't feel stuck and they're not changing, and maybe they're not needing change because we're not coming up against a roadblock or a problem with them. Maybe I have a rhythm of walking every morning or something, and that serves me so well. And I never think about, I'm stagnating in that. I haven't upped my ante because I'm not running into the adversity. I'm not running into that problem that I need to overcome and solve that tells me change is needed. Right. So
like the pain, people need to be motivated by pain. The problem has to get big enough that it creates a pain to inspire you to act, basically.
That's right. Like the pain to change has to be less than the pain of staying the same. And then that's when you'll make that shift and say, okay, I need to really start thinking about a different direction here. So, and change is so interesting too, right? Because if we look at a model for like the stages or the cycle of change in therapy, we've got 3 categories that come before we actually take action. So for people who are processing, we have the pre-contemplative stage where it's just kind of like, I don't even really think I need to make a change. I don't have a problem. I'm not aware of it. Other people around us might be aware of it, but we're not aware of it, right? And then we go into contemplative, which is where we begin to think, yeah, you know what, something might have to give here. Like, I think this is a problem, whether that's substance use, whether that's a relationship situation, whether that's whatever it is, we start to acknowledge that there's a problem, but we still haven't really taken action. It's just a mental mindset shift. And then it moves to preparation, and preparation can be a long time. So for me, it was 3 years. My last 3 years of teaching were really restless. I knew I needed to make a change, but I didn't know what the change was going to be. I knew I had to go, but what was I going to? I didn't have that discernment in the early stages. I just was trying to honor the restlessness that it had something to say to me, and it had something to teach me and to guide me. And then just doing exploring the next right question, having that next conversation with a friend, or my mentor and supervisor in the field is somebody I explored a lot of this with before I moved into it, because she was helping me with sort of that career question about what's going on with me. What is this restlessness about? So I have the unique I moved into that field, but my person who helped me move into that field is also in that field. So it's sort of like a real symbiotic relationship there. But but honoring that restlessness, it takes time, and you're preparing, and then you get to action. Then I applied to get my master's. Then I took, the next step to set up my business, like all those things, your action comes, but there's a whole lot of change that happens before there's an actionable step that you can see. And I think that's a big part of what we can help people with in psychotherapy is that mindset work, is that getting our heads around the processing that allows us to get to the action step.
I love that you shared that, because a lot of people think that change, whether again, it's a relationship, it's your health, it's your business, it's going to happen overnight. It's going to happen instantaneously. And that's not how it happens at all. Sometimes people will see someone do something really cool and they're like, oh, that just happened to you. Go, no, what you didn't see are all the years of preparation that it took to get that person to have the confidence to do that, or the skills or the clinical experience. And I mean, you're in healing, I'm in healing. Healing takes time. So healing in your own growth, healing and moving forward, it doesn't happen overnight. So when you counsel people, and I want to just be clear, like you work with people right now internationally, like
not internationally, right? Nationally, virtually.
Okay.
Yeah. Like in Canada, but we haven't the capacity to go beyond that at this point. We do have some people who work with us who are Canadian citizens, but living abroad. Right. But the main thing is just with the provisions of our college and that sort of thing, it limits us to sort of work across Canada, particularly right now.
Right. So if someone was listening to this and they're starting to feel those hunches, right? That, like you talked about those 3 stages, the hunch is like something's got to shift. Their body, their soul, their mind is whispering to them. What would you suggest that they do?
Well, it's probably one of those questions where we're going to answer with like, it's specific to the person, but I like the idea of thinking about things as the next right thing mentality. Right. So what's the next question I can ask, the next conversation I can have, the next thing I can investigate online, like if it's a training program, right? Or getting connected with an established business that's doing what you want to do. Maybe it is listening to some podcasts, like what's the next thing that I can do that moves me in a direction, and then that will provide a next right step from there. So just kind of really breaking it down to just those very moment to moment. This is in terms of our mental health as well, but in terms of exploring where you need to go, we can usually figure out what we need to do next. And where we get tripped up or stuck is when we project into that anticipatory anxiety. Like, well, I want to have X happening in 5 years from now. And you're already worried about the things related to X that have nothing to do with the stage you're in right now.
Right.
So, one of the things I coach the therapists that I train as well is to like embrace being a beginner, like let yourself be a newbie. I even say the phrase like play the newbie card, because you don't have to be a seasoned professional when you're a beginning professional. That's why we charge differently for you. That's why you have all the provisions that are there for you in terms of supervision and training that still happen at that stage, because you're allowed to be a beginner. And so if you embrace that, then that sort of informs what the next thing is. And of course, Annie Dillard, I love her quote about like, how we spend our days is of course how we spend our lives. And so when you think about that, it's like you will get to where you're trying to go if each step is in the direction towards that, one step at a time, as cliche as that.
And you're aligning with you keep checking in with yourself and align with, is this next step feeling right to you? Is it congruent with what you want? Are you checking in? Because sometimes I feel that people have a goal, right? They have intentions for, again, their health, their relationships, their business. Maybe they write it down somewhere. They do it once a quarter, once a year, but then life happens. Unexpected things happen, and they don't actually go back and check in and ask themselves those questions over and over again. Is this right for me? How does this fit with my values? Is this actually still what I want? So I think that self-reflection piece is really, really important for people too, to keep checking in and asking themselves, this next move, does it align with those things that I want?
Absolutely. And thinking about one thing where I like to do is think about seasons, like chunks literally of the seasons in the year or 3 months at a time. And thinking, this phrase I give people, which comes from a woman named Emily P. Freeman she has the Next Right Thing podcast, is where, so give credit where credit's due, but it's this idea of establishing like, these are the days of ... Like, what is my focus in this season? Am I aligned? Am I congruent, as you say, with my values, with my vision? But again, not projecting beyond like a manageable time. So, and also being able to, again, as loaded as this word is, but being able to pivot along the way. One thing I often say to people is like, my vision when I left teaching was to get my credentials to do this and have my own little home office in the front of my house, which was already kind of set up to do that, and have a few clients. And that was it. That's what I thought I was going to do. And that was what got me to get into my program and establish my business and start to do that. But then things shifted. And so I had to check in again and say, wait a second, I'm getting so many referrals now, and I hate turning people away. And I don't have my friends who are clinicians are all full, right? And so I don't have people I can safely say, I can really highly recommend this person. And so then it just sort of organically started to grow into this, well, maybe I should train another student, right? And the first student I took on, she'll tell you this herself. The first student I took on, I was like, I don't want to do this. Like, this was not on my radar. So I was kind of resistant within my own self because I wasn't able to follow sort of what was happening organically as well, follow that need. And so that checking in along the way might also mean that like what you thought you were envisioning is actually shifting to something else. And that's that staying with your authenticity and being mindful of those things and not saying, well, I can't take the student on because I'm only ever going to work in my home office, or taking a student on and then rejigging and saying, that wasn't for me. I do actually want to just stay in my own home office, right? Like it can go either way. You might have thought you wanted a big group practice and then you start going towards group practice. You're like, I don't want a big group practice.
I don't want to do that either.
Right. So you have to really be present to yourself along the way and watch. Sometimes you'll have a conversation that really closes a door that you thought you were going to go through. And then you have a different conversation that opens a door you didn't expect you were going to go through. People think it's silly. And I think it's silly sometimes when I think about how I never really thought about training a team of therapists. But when I think about my teaching background and my passion to serve my community and to have a staff that I can trust, that I know is trained well, it makes perfect sense that those things would match up, that it would be really, synergistic, I guess, those skills, that I could do that so easily. But it really, truly was not on my radar when I left teaching to do anything like this. but it makes so much sense now. And it's a way that I can really serve the need, because there's only so much of me. I only have so many clinical hours. How do I help people that keep coming in for support? Well, if I can put them with my team and I trust my team and I support them, it allows us just to have more of a influence and a support system.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, there's so many things I want to keep talking about here now. I knew this was going to happen.
Me too.
Because even what you just said, I mean, do you know how many docs I've spoken with? And my own story, listeners' views, if you haven't heard it, how did I get 20? I'm in clinical practice for 20 years now. 10 years ago, I made a big shift. The fact that I have 2 podcasts, that I do coaching, that I run events, I speak, I don't know how I know how I got here because like you, I just kind of kept evolving and listening to myself and also pushing myself and taking lots of imperfect action. And
absolutely. Oh,
that
boy.
I think is something that is really important to address here is, you would not have known that you would be good at teaching other therapists if you never tried. You would never have known that maybe being in your home office wasn't really your big vision if you never expanded out, right? And so many times I talk to clients or friends and they're like, I don't know, I have these ideas. Well, at some point you have to act, because if you never act, you'll never get data around whether that works for you, whether it's profitable, how does it make you feel? Is it what you thought it was going to be? So, imperfect action always is going to trump no action. And it's funny, the whole process that we go through. And if you just keep honoring yourself and how you evolve, even if I think about how this show has evolved, over 5 years, from just being for women in practice and then, men in practice and couples, and now expanding to talk to other healthcare professionals. It just keeps evolving because who I am and the content that I want to create and what I hear from my clients, that keeps evolving. So it's a really beautiful process. And I love that you've honored that for yourself the whole way. And you're teaching that and sharing that with other people.
It's kind of an approach that has always stuck really well with me. I remember, thinking about the idea that looking for the spaces where a perceived need and your passions aligned, and then build authentically from there. So my approach has always been, do I sense that there is, or is there actually somebody asking me? I'll give you an example. So when I was a younger mom, I ran a group for young moms, excuse me. And, one of the moms just came to me. She had 2 sisters and a number of people in the community who were connected. And she said, Sarah, would you run a moms group with some spiritual content for us? Because we're all struggling here. And I'm like, this is the easiest yes for me of all time, because there was already a need. There was already people that were aligned, and I could just show up with my skills to teach and bring resources to meet that need and facilitate that group. It was like a no-brainer. And that ran for, I don't know, many years, once a month. And then as we got into different stages, because we were all around the same stages in parenting, that shifted, and it just naturally sort of fizzled out. And, but I always think about in that moment, there was a perceived need versus me just putting it out on the radar. I want to do a mom's group, anybody in? It was no, there's a express need. And then I'm rising to meet that need. And then doing that in an authentic way that it works for me, but also serves the community. So it just makes a lot of sense, and it's aligned. I don't know. I sort of don't almost know any other way of doing it. That's just kind of how it has gone for me.
It's a simple way. And even if we were to just talk marketing for one quick sec, I tell my clients all the time, if you're looking at what to create, whether you want to do a podcast for your practice or write a social media post or an email, simply think about what are the conversations you're having in your practice every day. What are the questions that your community is bringing to you? Is it about an injury? Is it about wellness? Is it about water? Is it about how to sleep properly or ergonomics? If you just tap into what's in front of you and the need in your community, the content is easy to create because you can just see where the need is and whether you want to create an event.
Right. And surely if 1 or 2 people are resonating, there are others, because not everybody is speaking that into the space. Not everybody is as comfortable or as vulnerable sometimes to say, I'm struggling in my relationship. I really don't know how to connect to my husband, or I'm really struggling with my sleep patterns. They might be doing that, but it's not on their radar to bring that forward, maybe because of their personality or their comfort level. So for every couple of people that voice something, there's going to be more people that are experiencing that. It's not isolated.
And follow up to that, I would say, because a lot of clients I experience too, get caught up in, oh, I don't know if I know enough, or is anyone going to listen? Or so-and-so's already talking about this. I should like, well, you're a different messenger. People are going to hear it, your warmth, your personality. You could say the same thing to people in a different language that's going to resonate with them. And so I talk to clients a lot about, your mission is your message, and your message matters, because it's going to relate to someone totally different. My vibe and how I coach might be similar to something that another coach says, but the way I deliver it, just everything about me is probably different than someone else. And so you're going to also connect. And clients, like if you're thinking about, oh, I want to create this content or write this video or do something, just remember that you have a gift to share in your own unique way. And you just got to step into that a little bit more and embrace your authentic self, right? And we're using so many keywords today, but embrace who you are, because everyone has a message that there's a right person that needs to hear it.
Yeah. And in therapy, we talk about goodness of fit, like who's the right fit for you.
Yeah.
And even on our team, that's one of the things I love about having a team is not everybody is going to align with me as their therapist. And that's okay. Right. It's good to have different personalities, different genders, different ages, different ethnicities, like a broad strokes team, because there's different people who will find their person and that connection. And for therapy, the primary predictor of success, if you will, in therapy is that therapeutic alliance. Do you have your right person? And a lot of people will give up on therapy because they've had a bad experience and they didn't feel connected. And so I just always want to encourage them, like, keep looking. Don't give up on therapy. I had that experience with my naturopath. I had a perfectly fine naturopath that I was working with, but it just wasn't jiving. And I thought, I still think there's something here. And then I ended up landing with my naturopath who I have now. And it was like, this is my person. This is very obviously how I needed to engage with this. They're both similar training, both highly credentialed, but it didn't align with me. And so that alliance was so important. And it's so important in our care providers to do that. And so when you have, don't give up. If you haven't yet found your person, keep looking. We're out there, and don't settle for anything less than that, because that's where you're going to get what you need.
Yeah. And I think there's two pieces to that. I think one, absolutely referring out, because I'm happy to say in my clinical practice, this is what I do. This is not what I do. And if someone comes in, in their initial assessment with me, I can pretty much figure out if I'm the right person for them. And I'm very happy to refer them to another amazing doc in my community that I think is going to give them the care that they need. So that is important for the patient experience, but it's also really important for the practitioner, because what brings me a lot of joy in my practice and something that I work with my clients on is really knowing who you want to work with and knowing your skill set. Because if you want to practice that's simple and brings you joy and happiness, you want to walk into it and feel like you're fulfilling. It's like any relationship, like you're giving to the people that you want to give to. And it's much more joyous as a practitioner to have that fit as well.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And from an energy management standpoint, if we're thinking about even burnout and stuff, if you're working with clients who are, pushing your limits in certain ways or stretching those boundaries of competence in a way that doesn't feel life-giving to you, or you're coming up against a case and you're like, this just doesn't fire me up, like I often talk to people, like, I don't work with people with depression, like not active clinical depression. I work with people who are, depressed and dealing with mood stuff, but I don't really have a niche of working with people with depression. I don't find that I can manage it very well. I just don't feel energetically that I can work with that to really affect great change for those particular clients. But I have great clinicians on my team who can. And like you say, other people in the community. At Covey Wellness Center, we don't do eating disorders, like active eating disorders, but we have great people in our community that we can refer to who we're very confident does do that. So it's very clarifying to know, like, this is my niche. This is my perfect client. And then you're working with all of the things that are already aligned. Like, I know I'm working with the right client when the books that I'm reading are like, they'll come in and I'll be like, well, I just read this the other day. And it's going to help you, because I recognize that connection is there and that alignment is there. And it's highly energetic as compared to just sort of catch-all taking everything. And I get the reason for doing that. And sometimes early in your career, you have to do that because you need to pay the bills. And so you have that general training, and you need to try, like you were saying before, you need to work with some cases before you kind of even know what it is that you do have a passion for that really does light you up, and analyze that. Again, that idea of like moving forward and taking that information as a behavioral experiment. Like in psychotherapy, we'll say, well, set yourself up with a behavioral experiment and collect the data. So try this. Maybe you want to try tweaking your bedtime and you want to go to bed at this hour and not drink coffee after this moment. Try that and see how that affects it. If that doesn't affect it, let's use that data to then try the next step. Let's tweak it. Right. Yeah. And so there's this welcome sort of trial and error. I get to experiment in very safe ways to get the data that I need to really find what works for me. So that's true in taking care of ourselves. And that's also true in like our work as clinical professionals and things, I think.
Yeah. And yesterday I had someone in my practice. I hadn't seen her in a couple of months. And she was just like, oh my God, this happened, this happened, this happened. She goes, and after she got adjusted, she was like, oh my God. And I'm like, now I know how much I miss this. I said, sometimes it's good to have a break from things, from habits, because when you can know how you do not want to feel, it can also give you a good litmus test to what you want to do moving forward. We often think we have to focus on what we do want. And I sometimes think if you know what you don't want, it also makes your decisions clearer a little bit too.
It does. It's totally clarifying. And I do think that, again, that's about being mindful as to what's happening in your case there before and after a treatment. So I came in this way, I have a treatment and I'm going out this way. That's if you're mindful about that and present to yourself, it's a very clear indicator that this was a good direction. Yeah. Right. That I was responding well.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about, some great ideas and how you've expanded your practice. You have 4 kids. I'm sure you've evolved in your business model with your children's needs as well. All this conversation, we started chatting about burnout and overwhelm. So let's kind of circle back to that now. Like, how can docs or healthcare professionals of any discipline learn to embrace stepping into more of their power, embracing needs in their community, perceived needs, stepping into all of these good things they want to do on their dreams without overextending themselves, overcommitting themselves? And what are some of the signs perhaps that they can look at to check in with themselves and evaluate, is this right for me right now in this season?
And burnout is obviously a complex. We could easily do a lot on it. So we're going to hit some high spots here, but I will just say, interestingly, again, back to the seasons idea, different seasons allow you to do different things in terms of I like the idea of professional, like work-life harmony. I think balance is very elusive. It's hard to balance your life.
I think it's bullshit. I think at any given time, parts of my life are not balanced, but they are getting time and attention where they can, and they should at that given moment.
And are those parts, kind of working together, right? So that harmonizing idea, are they working together in a way that works for this season, for this age and stage? So I actually have 2 of my kids who work at Covey Wellness Center. So I'm at a different stage where they can actually be employed, and it's created jobs for them. So that's a really cool thing that, 10 years ago, my kids would not be able to participate in that in any meaningful way. And that's been a really neat thing to see them flourish as well in different capacities here. So there are different ways in which that harmony can take place with your family as well, if you're navigating, kids, for example, and work. So just in terms of like talking about burnout, so I thought it might just be helpful, even as I'm thinking about it, like, what are we talking about when we talk about burnout? Like everybody kind of knows what it feels like to feel overwhelmed, but how do we know if we're like burning out or burnt out, right? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I don't even like to really use the word because certainly we all know people who have gotten to that exhaustion point, and then usually they have a healthcare crisis of some kind. Yeah. Physical or mental or emotional. Yeah. But a lot of people I know they're inching their way, and they're at least recognizing, they're feeling stuck, they're feeling unfulfilled, they're feeling unhealthy. So I think let's talk more about like knowing your boundaries, knowing where, some of the, like you already just talked about, acknowledging different seasons. Yeah. I like to look at also like filtering what you say yes to based on where you're at in your seasons. I use joy as a filter all the time. And if, people say, oh, you should do this, I think, will it make me happy? If it's the answer is a yes, then it's easy. But I also filter it with like, can this, like you just said, can this fit into my existing life? Can this fit into the needs that my sons have of me right at this moment? There's things that I'm doing now. There's no way in hell I would have done 5 years ago because my kids were at that point 15 and 10. and they needed very different things than they need now. So I think, honoring the seasons of your life, filtering what you say yes to. But yeah, just to get back to your question, I think like looking at like, what is burnout? Like, how do we just recognize when you're tending towards exhaustion, like mental and physical exhaustion? Is that kind of where you're at?
Yeah. I think it's great to think about health on a spectrum. So one of the things that I think about is the fact that I work a lot with the Enneagram. So I don't know if people are familiar with that, but it's a personality typology. But the concept from in general, but they also have that as part of it, is talking about moving from your integrated self to your disintegrated self and how that's on a spectrum. So your greatest potential for growth and alignment and health is at the integrated. And that's like, we feel like we're firing on all cylinders, right? And then the low end of health is the disintegration spectrum, where we feel that we don't feel like ourselves. That's when we start to say like, I'm not me, right? Those kinds of phrases. And so when we recognize that our health exists on that spectrum all the time. Right. And so
I don't just do one thing. I'm healthy now. Don't do anything ever again.
There's always fluctuation in a given day of how we're showing up in lower health or higher health, in more integration or lesser integration. And so how are we moving ourselves and aware of moving in the direction of integration, particularly when we have things that have like that flow, that ebb and flow. And so we talk about self-care slide markers, right? So what do you notice about yourself that's like, ooh, that's a bit of a red flag that just kind of notifies me that I'm kind of moving into exhaustion, or I'm moving out of that optimal space that indicates health for me. And that's different depending on your personalities. But I'll give you an example for me. So for me, when I start saying like, no more people, go away people, that's a big flag for me. Now, for other people who are more introverted, that may not be a flag at all for them, because that's sort of a normal way that they live in the world. And so that may not be an indicator of them really sliding into beginning to burn out, sliding into like a problem with self-care. And so thinking about those things, what is that? If I start to become really nitpicky or irritable, for example, for me, I'm like, ooh, that's a red flag for me. That's on me. I'm not managing my emotions very well. Maybe for some other people, it's sleep. Maybe for some other people, they can't focus. Like, what are those flags for you, particularly to you, where you can say, I know that I'm not doing well when, right? And then that information, when you see that happening, you notice that some people lose appetite, some people get headaches, some people, there's so many ways that this can present. And it's not just one singular thing, but you have all these markers that tell you something needs to shift, because if we're present to them and not ignoring those markers, then we can address them and move us back into integration, back into health, making adjustments to do that. So I often will say, like, pay attention to what's going on and then attend to it. So pay attention and attend to it. Because if you notice, for example, if you're present with yourself and you notice at the end of your day, this is one that I do, and probably you can help with this, Melissa, but I notice my shoulders up by my ears sometimes if I'm working and I'm just focused on something. I don't even notice how much tension. And I'm just like, it's like, well, if I notice that, then I can like stretch them, release them, let the tension come down, give myself a little break, because I'm noticing that that's built up. But it's only by paying attention to it that I can actually respond to it in a healthy way that promotes wellness. I mean, we can go through days and days without drinking because we're not paying attention to our thirst. We can go through days without, eating because we're not paying attention to our hunger. So those basic cues expanded to like knowing how we function in the world and what we need to notice to help us stay on track. So I think when you start to see those red flag markers, that's those signs. And, before you get to what we were talking about, that full burnout stage of like a real breakdown, and that concept of like, if you don't take time for wellness, you will have to take time for illness. Right.
Yeah,
so right. And I mean, I'm preaching to myself here about burnout. I was laughing and I said to my assistant, when I was sort of thinking about this concept and prepping, because you'd asked to talk about it, I was like, man, like, this is the hard work of being a therapist, when you're like preaching these things. And sometimes you're like, ooh, I need to mirror that back to myself. And like, there's some joy in that, because it like keeps us accountable to ourselves in our wellness journeys. But it's also hard sometimes. You feel like a bit of an imposter, but that goes back to that imperfect progress, and we're humans along the journey with you. So it's not like I have everything figured out about burnout, but I have learned a lot more about what my signs are and then how to attend to them, how to create space for myself, how to shift my schedule, how to change my diet or my sleep, like whatever it is that I'm noticing is needing a change, and reaching out for help, right? Reaching out for
Yeah.
help with whoever your care provider is going to be. Like I rely pretty heavily on my naturopath to help me with my physical health journey, right? And obviously therapists and chiropractors, and like how are you attending to that with the people who are there to help you get back on track and stay on track?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a big factor in sort of preventing burnout, is having the self-awareness to know when those flags are popping up, when you're moving into disintegration. If you say to yourself, I don't feel like myself, that's something to take note of. Like, don't dismiss that. If you're not feeling like yourself, that's how you would describe it. Explore that, whether that's with a therapist or journaling or with yourself, whatever you need to do to honor that flag that's coming up for you.
Yeah. And I love that you said, the whole piece about working with the enneagrams, and like, people are different. Like, we're not all supposed to be the same. And so honoring who we are as individuals, and what I need, what makes me feel overwhelmed might be completely different than what makes you feel overwhelmed. Totally. And so honoring our individual differences and what we need to thrive. We know obviously the basics of human design, right? And well, I don't mean human design, like the human design stuff. I mean, like, we all need water. We all need rest. We all need love and connection. We all need, movement, good food. Like, those are the basics of health, right? But then what works for your body chemistry might be different than me. What you feel, you need to be, or how much you want to be around people might be different than me. So I think it's really important for docs and all of you listening to just make sure you're checking in with yourself and what you need. It might be different from your partner or your kids or your friends, but knowing yourself. And I also think it's great that you honored, none of us have it all figured out, right? And so just like, you shared, like, some days you got off track. Well, so do I, so do lots of other people. And that's why I think this conversation is important, to give yourself grace and space, that do the best you can and know what the next right step is, and to be able to check in with yourself and figure out, how am I feeling today? And what needs to change? And some seasons it may be only one little thing that can change. And other times you can plan to do something a little bit more. But if you can recognize the signs, as you just said, illness takes a lot more out of us than building wellness. So we don't want any of the people to be dealing with illness if we can avoid it.
Yeah. And it's not always huge things. I think that's the encouraging part of it. It's not always major things. Like, change often takes place in small, consistent steps, right? Like something as simple as, like, I have a lot of people who work with me who are not actively working on something around mental health. They're not actively in a crisis or in a situation where they're really struggling, but they are on sort of like a maintenance program. So they come in every 4 to 6 weeks and they just make a schedule in their calendar to have a conversation about how they're doing, how their self-care is going, to check in. So there's some accountability. If they haven't done that anywhere else, they know that the appointment with Sarah or somebody on the team is going to come up. And that's honoring the fact that this matters and that I want to come back to it and process it and rejig and tweak, right, my lifestyle so that it's working for me. And so there's lots of different ways to think about that, that's a much more sort of proactive, preventative way of looking at mental health. I don't want people just to wait till they're burned fully out, right? Like, I don't even want them to wait till they have a red flag necessarily to come and have a conversation. Like, I would love for people to feel like going to a mental health professional is just the same thing as going to a doctor for a checkup, where there is no illness, there is no crisis, there is no problem. I just want to be well. I want to live, and I want to know what that looks like for me in this season, and have somebody who's helping with tools and conversations and clarifying that for me, so that, I can perhaps avoid the full burnout, right? I'm not saying people shouldn't come to us when they're burned out. Of course they should. But wouldn't it be amazing if we could have people coming to us in the first 5 years of their marriage, for example, just to establish a couples counseling connection before 15 years in, patterns are so formed that it's really hard for them. It's a much bigger, more overwhelming thing. Like, can we be ahead of that?
Well, and objectivity is so powerful, right? And I'm glad you brought up, because I'm thinking here, sort of the 5 things we've talked about, how you can avoid exhaustion And one of the things I wrote down that was seek outside help. And then you talked about it, which was great, because whether it's a physician, a therapist, a coach, a pastor, like if you're religious, like our friends, even like outside help objectivity is golden, because we get stuck. As you know, people get stuck in their own stories, their own limitations, triggers, wounds, old patterns, childhood trauma, like all that stuff. Yeah. And it gets really hard to step outside of it unless you have someone else that can guide you. And I mean, I'm a big believer in therapy at all stages of life, right? Because I just think it's so powerful, as you just said, to check in with how are you feeling up top? Like we can deal with stress, physical. I deal with the effects of people's physical stress. And then sometimes I'll see the same patterns and I'll look like, okay, what is actually going on? Like, I can't help you with this, but let me send you to someone who can. Because if you don't really address the stress with your work or with your partner, this physical pattern is going to keep coming back. And your digestion is still going to be off, and you can change it, but you need to get to the cause of a problem. And I think for me, that's the core of chiropractic. It's like, let's look at the cause of dysfunction in your body. And for a lot of people, if they're not giving some time and attention to their emotional and mental well-being and seeking the support of professionals, they can just be missing a really beautiful part of their full expression as humans.
We don't realize how much our own minds are echo chambers for themselves, right?
Yeah.
Like we have limitations to our own counsel because we'll loop on the same thing and we can't move that thinking productively forward because we're stuck in how we've told ourselves to think about the stories we've told ourselves, the cognitive biases that we have. Like it's very difficult for us to not just run the same track, even neurobiologically, because that's the pattern that's been created. And so that outside influence, that objectivity, like you say, the person who can ask a really good question to bring forward an insight, can offer an alternative story that might be something that can move us forward. Like that can be so life-changing. Like so many of us can point to something that we used to think, and then we don't think that way now. Like I used to think it was important to do everything perfectly. And now I know that good enough is good enough. Well, at some point, somebody said something or we read something that tweaked that shift. And now our life is totally on a different trajectory. Like even one, maybe people are even listening to this conversation and something has tweaked with them, has resonated with them. And that's a change that they're now going to carry forward. And so again, it's like we don't want to underestimate how much that matters and how integrated we are. It's, even teaching people the connection between thoughts and physical reactions and emotions. Like a lot of people think it doesn't matter what I think. My body has nothing to do with what I think, as if they're separate entities. And so walking them through some psychoeducation about like what happens and getting them to notice what actually happens when you think something in your body and in your emotions. And if you move your body, what happens to your thinking? Like it's often really surprising to me how little people think about that interconnectedness. And so that's that holistic approach to care, like coordinate, have your care coordinated. So there's a lot to it, but it's certainly, I'm saying, from the mental health perspective, and there's a lot going on from the mind space that makes a difference, and the emotional space, of course. So and you want to be holistic and thinking about it.
I'm laughing because there have been times that I've spoken with my therapist and she'll say something or ask me a question, like you just said. I'm like, well, where did you come up with that? And I'll look at her, I go, you're really good. Like I'll tease her, right? I'm like, wow, that's some good shit. Like, where'd that come from? And then she makes me think about something from a whole different perspective. And let's be really real. Like your friends, your loved ones are still going to also filter things in a different way than someone who has no emotional internal connection to you. So it's amazing to me, the connections. And like you just said, like the things from your previous experiences, the neural patterning and all that stuff. I mean, there's a reason you're a trained professional. And so I just want to we're going to have to wrap up here. Because you've got to get on to see clients and, we have other things to get doing here. But I think that's a great way to line up, is that, the power of objectivity, but also, is there a way that people can find a good fit? Right. Like we talked earlier about, the goodness of fit with obviously with every healthcare professional, but are there ways that people can determine if they do want to work with a psychotherapist, how that might be the right person for them?
Yeah, there's a couple of things I could say about that. So what we do at Covey Wellness Center is we have a general screening that happens before, and then I oversee those general screenings. So we have some questions that we ask just based on needs and preferences and presenting issues and things like that, that help us sort of filter and think, okay, well, this person's experiencing like a significant loss and grief. And so we place them with this person who has some particular skills around that, or this is, sexual trauma and assault. So that would be this person on our team, right? And so there's some things like that. And then we always recommend to people, it's part of our transition email, try 3 sessions. Even if we think we've got like their fit, like nailed, like we're like, they're going to do really well. And we have some things that we gauge through that screening process. And I mean, it's not a scary screening process. It's just trying to address some of those things. And then we say, and then circle back to us if you're not feeling it, right? Like if in 3 sessions, you're not feeling like this is what you were looking for, this is what you were hoping for. We give an option to come back to us and let's see if we can find another person that's going to work. And so we just make that really normal in the process, like that it's okay to not jive at first, then not give up, we redirect, right? It's a bit of a behavioral experiment. And then I also, want people to think about like, if they're meeting with a therapist and that therapist is not soliciting feedback and moving with them, like we're a very client-centered practice. So we don't, for example, say, okay, if you're working with me, I'm going to run you through 12 steps of this very specific modality. We can offer groups and different things to train in different modalities, but we have more of an integrative approach. And so it's not like you come to session number 1 and I decide what happens on session number 1, you come and you decide. So if you have a therapist who's not checking in with you about whether this is working, not soliciting feedback at the end of a session as to what could make it better, what was resonating, where do we need to go? If you don't have that sense that you can tell your therapist, this session didn't work for me, or I really don't want to talk about that, or I'd like to go in a different direction, then that for me is a big red flag. That's not a good fit, because you want to have that opportunity to collaborate with your therapist. We use the driver's seat analogy, that you're in the driver's seat, we're in the passenger seat, and we're showing up for you with our tools and our maps and our snacks and everything, but you're controlling when we get in the car, how fast we go, whether we take a detour, whether we're still going to the original destination, whether we decide to do another trip together, like you. And so if you're, to me, like that's something to think about. If you're not feeling in charge of your therapy work, that would be a problem for me in terms of goodness of fit, because it's going to be very hard for you to inform the process to make it fit for you, right?
I want it to be a partnership model. I mean, I think the same thing in my practice. I would much rather a partnership model of care where my job is to say, here's what I can help you with. Where are you at in this journey? And how do I fit with that if I'm the right fit? And then just keep evaluating as time goes on. So that's some great advice, because it's, it's certainly something we talked about that everyone can benefit from, but trying to find someone is a question that I often get, how do you find someone, where I live? So, listeners, viewers, I'm going to encourage you to definitely connect. You're going to find in the show notes all the ways that you can connect with Sarah and her practice. And as she had mentioned, you guys work with people nationally, and perhaps even if people are struggling and they are in other parts of the country, the world, you can help find them someone in person if they need to. But in any event, you do create some really great content. What's the best way for people to connect with you? Instagram, Facebook, social media, website, like what would you prefer?
So I'm personally everywhere in my professional sort of branding as Sarah Joy Covey, and then Covey Wellness Center is everywhere else. So Sarah Joy Covey and or Covey Wellness Center we're on Instagram is where I primarily show up. But we are also on Pinterest and Facebook. If those are your platforms, we are also there. And then we have a website, Covey Wellness Center. We have all the things, .com, .ca, whatever. So whatever you search, you'll find us. And there's a contact us form. So if you have a question about products or services or what's available, that's the easiest way. That goes right to my central screening team. And you put in a little bit of information, and then we'll be in touch from there. So that is the simplest way. You can certainly DM us on Instagram and stuff, but I'm not always as consistent with getting back. And certainly with the sensitivity of like clinical stuff, we recommend the website, but we'll try not to lose track of you wherever you find us. And we're happy to join you there. And we do like to provide content. So even if you are outside of Canada, we have, like, I have a lot of blog posts that I'm putting up every 2 weeks on different topics. And so there may be resources there. There's some videos there and digital content and courses. We're just creating stuff all the time. So even accessing that kind of stuff through the website is a great way to go. So yeah, we'd love to hear from some people.
Thank you, first of all, for your time, but I also want to honor you for, the courage for finding your voice and sharing things in your community. And even, again, when I first connected with you, circling back how we got introduced, like it takes courage to share what you're feeling in a video. It takes courage to make changes in your career. It takes courage to lead others and teach them. And so I want to honor you for that and congratulate you on everything that you built in the Elmville community. And thank you for your time today. I look forward to connecting with you in person sometime.
Yeah, it's going to be wonderful. I'm sure this won't be the last conversation we'll have.
No.
Okay, take care then, Melissa. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed today's show. Find out more about today's guests and everything else that we talked about in the show notes. You can also find all this content and so much more, including videos, blog posts, and how you can work with me on the Rockstar Doctor Life website. If you haven't yet reviewed the show, we'd love it if you headed on over to iTunes, subscribe, and leave us a review about what your thoughts are about future episodes for the show and what you like best. Feel free to connect with me on Instagram at Melissa Longo DC and of course on Facebook. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time.